Welcome back to Unmasking the Trans Movement with Jon Uhler. I'm your host, Brad Wilder. Today, part 2, back with Eva Kurilova and Jon Uhler. Jon and Eva are going to discuss, gender ideology and how it's been affecting both women and children here in Canada. Let's jump right in with both of them right now.
Hi.
Brad, thank you again. We couldn't do this without you. Eva, thank you for being back with us. We'll pick up where we left off. I'm going to encourage people to review the first part 1 of this, because we're doing a fairly deep dive into the issue, the dangers of sending deviant men. And that's the only kind of man that would want to go into a woman's prison, because they obviously know they are traumatizing these women. And the only kind of guy that's interested in traumatizing women are deviant men. So we covered that. I got rather exercised because I'm passionate about this, having worked in a prison. I know the kind of men that are going to request transfer. So for viewers that are just joining us, again, share with us, and you can add to it your concerns about these men that here in civilized countries, in Canada, in the US, the policies are that they are sending male inmates who are requesting to be sent into female prisons. They're allowing these kind of men access to an entire population of very vulnerable women. So anything you want to add to that?
Well, I think that does segue sort of nicely into the push to push this on children, because you had been talking about how, these are deviant predators, these are deviant men. They want to leave a mark on their victim, and I think that kind of, when you look at how this is being pushed on kids, how strongly, how fervently, you start to wonder why. Why is this so important, right? And in my opinion, this also kind of brings women in as well, because there's a lot of argument within our communities, our gender critical, or whatever you want to call it. Who's causing this, right? And I tend to agree with you that there's a very small group of just very deranged and deviant men who it's kind of for their benefit. They want to get into the spaces of women and children. And I think, unfortunately, they have a lot of help from women who are trying to be well-meaning, who are trying to seem nice, who are trying to seem progressive. And I think that, like you said before, they act like useful idiots, especially when it comes to pushing this on children and in schools. It's like they're doing the bidding of these men, essentially. I don't think most of these women are sexually deviant. Some absolutely could be, but they're very naive. They think they're doing such a great thing, and they're pushing this onto kids, because in schools it is mostly women, especially at the younger grades. And so what I see happening here in Canada, another one of my main research areas and interests that kind of brought me into this is what's happening to kids and the transitioning of children, and offering this to kids as just this wonderful path to take, to pause your puberty, to sterilize yourself, to take cross-sex hormones. And a part of the reason that this means so much to me, and a part of the reason why I never brought into the whole trans kid trend or craze or whatever. A few years ago, I was thinking, okay, fine, trans women are women. Okay, fine. You kind of get pushed into that. You don't think about it. You sort of accept it. I never accepted the idea of a trans child, ever, because I would always think back to my childhood and think that could have been me. Super easily. I was super tomboyish. I wrote a piece about this for Colin Wright's Substack. I liked typical boy activities. I like to have my hair short. I still do. And so I just always thought, if that was me today, a gender doctor would, a teacher at school would say, hey, do you feel like a boy? Now at school they'll push you onto a counselor who'll give you a diagnosis, who will tell you, yeah, you're really trans. And so that kind of sparked my interest in this program that we have here in Western Canada called Soji 123. Gender ideology is pushed in schools in many ways. This is not the only program, but it's a huge one here. It's in every single school in British Columbia.
Could you, for our listeners, you just referenced, it's called Soji 123. Could you define what Soji means?
Yeah, good idea. So Soji stands for sexual orientation and gender identity. That's what the acronym means. You'll probably hear it used all over the place. It's not just exclusive to this program. It's used in healthcare settings and everything. Specifically to this program, it's Soji 123, and the 123 refers to the 3 steps to make us, this is all under the guise of anti-bullying. So it's the 3 steps to make a school a welcoming, safe, awesome place for sexual and gender minorities, children specifically. So the whole sort of gist of this program, which is not part of the curriculum, it's its own charity. They come in, they give resources. They're not actually part of the education system, which is strange that they get to come in and dictate how teachers teach sexuality and gender. So their whole gist is that everybody has a sexual orientation and gender identity, including children. They don't leave children out of it. They, not only is the gender identity bad enough, but even the sexual orientation part, these are children. They don't.
So what I want people to hear, since this program is called Unmasking the Trans Movement, so the premise is there's more behind this thing, the trans movement. There's something behind all this. Right now, what you're doing for parents is you're pulling back the curtain and helping them see that this deviant sex ed stuff, it's part of something. So keep going. But I want them to track with you. You're now actually getting into the heart of the nuts and bolts of what are kids now learning. There's a group that is pushing into schools what you're describing now.
Yes. And I would say, you could extrapolate this to any programs across the US and Canada that are pushing these kinds of ideas. I would say this is not unique or different. This is just one way that I've researched, that I have followed the money on. So first of all, there's, the gender identity information. It's just highly confusing to children. They show them, I don't know if you've ever seen the graphic of the gender unicorn. All those graphics that have a cutesy cartoon character, of course, to lure the children in, colors, and they have these different slides for, how masculine and feminine you feel, if your sex is more male-ish or female-ish. It's all anti-scientific. It all just confuses children, kids as young as elementary school aged. And even the sexual
orientation. That's where my apologies, but that's where we are hearing this term fluid, gender fluid.
Yeah. So they'll teach you that it's all very contradictory, right? Because they'll teach you your gender identity is just so fixed and so stable that you need to medicalize children for this, to give them puberty blockers and cross-sex hormones. At the same time, they're teaching these ideas about gender fluidity and even that sex is a spectrum. And so it doesn't make any sense. You can't fault these young kids growing up now for just being wildly confused, because they're supposed to be all gender fluid, but at the same time you have to medicalize yourself. And I think that comes back to the deviant men, because you have men like Richard Levine in the States, who I'm not sure what he plays in Biden's government.
I think they made him an admiral now. He was
admiral,
the health system in Pennsylvania that stuck all the older folks with COVID back into convalescent hospitals.
Yes, right? Wonderful. But so he has said, he's trans now. He has said he's happy he was able to have children, right? He was able to sexually develop, have children, and then he transitioned. Men like him, and him specifically, are now pushing for these transition treatments to happen to children, which would sterilize them, right? So it is a very kind of by proxy way of these men to have victims, in a way, to sterilize them, to steal their sexual function, to steal their fertility, and this is being pushed in schools, and it's not hyperbolic. I mean, this stuff leads to children being very confused. We had a case here in Canada several years ago where a young girl had come home and she was crying to her mom because she was like, oh, the school told me that maybe I'm not a girl, I could be a boy, I could be anything. And she was like, but I like being a girl. Like, this is what happens. In a way, it's also a bit of the kind of parentification of children, of treating them like little adults, of which is concerning as well. That they would know their inner gender identity, that they would know their sexual orientation. Kids as young as 9 are reading books that discuss sexual orientation, that discuss who are you attracted to, who do you have sexual feelings for. These are children who haven't even started puberty, who wouldn't be having those feelings yet. So, you can't help it. I might sound sometimes a little too wild and raving that I'm saying, look what they're teaching to kids, they're sexualizing them. But they absolutely are to be introducing these classroom materials. And I should back up. So part of Soji, the 3 steps, I don't know them off by heart, but part of it is to introduce materials into the classroom to teach children about these concepts of gender identity, sexual orientation, to put up symbols on the walls like pride flags. And of course, it goes even further. It does away with sex segregated washrooms, changing rooms. Part of the Soji guidelines is that the school should strive as much as possible to just let kids by gender identity use whatever facilities they want, as well as any extracurricular activities. So that means sports, no sex segregated sports. Of course, they keep them segregated by gender. They just let the boys go on the girls' team. So, lots of issues nowadays. There was recently a father at a school board meeting in Canada who was raising issues of the fact that teenage boys were now allowed to go into his daughter's bathroom. And they shut down his speech. They wouldn't let him keep talking. One of the school board members walked out, a trans one, and he was just raising legitimate concerns. He's the father of a teenage daughter, and he knows that boys are now allowed to self-ID into her washroom. This is stealing. So we talked about women in prison, of course, that's stealing their spaces and their security of person. This is now in our schools where young girls and teenage girls can't have their own spaces. And I think, what frustrates me the most is a lot of women who champion this are women my age who sort of have the luxury of they're not in prison. They don't have to deal with this in prison. They're not the young girls in school who they're forcing to to share change rooms with boys or to share sports teams with boys. And so they are doing, in a sense, the bidding of these deviant men by pushing these policies and putting them in place and not having to sort of deal with the repercussions of that. I know it would have been easy for me to just pretend none of this was a problem because it wasn't affecting me.
There we go. And, myself as well. That's why it's so compelling to have those of us that have no vested interest other than protecting women and children. So we've said before, we're not anti anything other than that which would place women and children in harm's way. And what a lot of people don't seem to understand, and kind of understandably, is the impact of pornography and the internet. Right? It's one and the same now. On kids. Every kid has a cell phone now, which is pretty safe to say. The average kid, and I've seen different stats, but by age 10 or 11, boys are being exposed to pornography. Now, the pornography now is much different than the pornography when I was being raised. You had to get a paper version of Playboy with a centerfold. Okay, that's laughable now. I have people say, "Oh, you know this thing about pornography. How do you define pornography?" You got to watch your face when I say the old-fashioned Playboy. They go, "That's not porn." Correct. Okay, so that's what we're talking about. Meaning, if you think that's a joke, look how far down the degrees of deviance you are. Now, what kind of stuff does a young male that then is now going through puberty? So let's take a high school student. Male, he's having access to what? Or a junior high kid that's now a boy who's now got hormones flowing. He's been introduced to pornography, and through these policies, what you've just described is these policies say we're doing away with the boys and girls washroom or bathrooms or toilets. We're just going to have one room. Okay. We all know about the dangers anyways of hazing, girls going into the restroom and getting hazed by other girls, or boys beating the tar out of other young boys. We know the dangers of bathrooms anyways, of same-sex bathrooms. Now you're going to take boys who either are normal and embarrassed now, because any guy should be embarrassed if he's in what amounts to the girls' room, right? If you've ever had the experience, right, on a trip, you go into a fast food restaurant because you have to go to the washroom. I took my boys, I got walk in. Nobody else was in there, fortunately. We finished. I'm not aware. We're washing our hands, and here comes a woman. Well, I first think she must be in the right? Until she looks at me with that look like, and I looked around, there were no urinals. And I said, guys, we're leaving, right? It's like, how mortified. Okay, that should be a normal, most people
Yes.
have that experience. That's a normal response. Why? Because I still have my sense and sensibilities about me. But if I had been into pornography, if I had become deviant, then I'm in there on purpose. I'm in there to get an effect and get myself aroused. So you can take a teen boy who now you've changed his mind literally, who is now thinking deviant thoughts because he's watching this kind of stuff, and you're going to tell him he can go where? And you expect that to go well? No. And so there's a case of a father, I forget which state in the US, his daughter was sexually assaulted. They tried to cover it up, the school did, because they're mandated reporters.
Yep.
And I spoke to a principal, by the way, a couple of years ago, who actually then became a real estate agent, and he helped us with our home. He said, and this was a couple of years ago, this was like 6 years ago, and I was describing kind of what I do or what I speak to. He says, well, John, when I was a principal, and that was a number of years prior to that, he said, we were getting reports from teachers every day on a weekly basis of students. And this was in a junior high, this is an elementary school, of sexual assaults.
Oh my God.
So this is probably about 10 years ago now.
Yeah.
So what I tell any school board member, any administrator, is you guarantee an increase in sexual assaults if you have this kind of material coming into your student body, so to speak. You're teaching these kids, you will guarantee an increase in sexual assaults against girls.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. And like you said, it's crazy because the men who like we would have the least risk in sharing our spaces with are the men who don't want to be in them. The men who want to come into our spaces and who see that as no big deal, they're pushing boundaries. These are the men who are actually more dangerous to us, as shown by the guys in prisons who want to do this. Of course, no man should. Of course, we all deserve our privacy. Even, of course, men, even though it's not so much a safety issue, deserve privacy and to have spaces for yourselves as well, right? So the people who respect those boundaries are actually the ones who would be safer to share spaces with. That's the conundrum here.
I mean, if someone suggested, well, I go in and you look at normal men, like at a sporting events or something, and the lines for the women's room is always longer. Understandably, we have it a little bit easier. So, you feel badly for the women. And there were times I've seen where some of the compassionate men say, okay, guys out of the washroom, we're letting women go in. And, that's a nice thing. We clear out, let the women go in because we have compassion, but no guy wants to be in that sort of space doing a private thing, going to the washroom with women. It's just human nature, unless that's been broken down.
Exactly. Actually, it's interesting because I was just at a show and I saw that the women's bathroom line was literally 20 minutes long. The men's wasn't. A couple of nice guys were coming out saying, hey, would you like us to stand guard while you go? And
that's another guy.
Exactly, to check that it's empty. And some women actually did kind of run in and run out. And what I found was a bit interesting is that there was women at this show who, this is assumption on my part, totally assumption, but I could tell that perhaps they identify as non-binary, they, them, they had the colored hair, and they were, of course, in line for the women's, of course, because even the women who tried to opt out of womanhood, will still use female spaces, will still be on female sports teams. Even in prisons, actually, there has not been, to my knowledge, to anyone's knowledge, a single case of a trans man wanting transfer from the women's prison to the men's prison. It just doesn't go that way. The risk is one way. So that's a very, very, interesting dynamic.
Okay, so continue educating parents on Soji sex, the dangers, the material they're going to get in front of students.
Yeah, so they're the kind of books that these kids read, like I said, it's just confusing them. I mean, there are some parents who have stood at school board meetings in the US and in Canada with books that will describe sex acts, that describe even gay sex, that just stuff that is completely inappropriate. And what I find most baffling is when parents start to bring this up at school board meetings, usually their microphones are cut off, like they're not allowed to speak anymore. And that's actually, not surprising because another factor of this that I have researched extensively is where is the money coming from to put these programs in schools, right? So, not surprisingly, largely in British Columbia, um, the Soji 123 program was mostly government funded, but also by some of our major banks. It's just a way for them to virtue signal. So TD Bank, RBC, Royal Bank of Canada, they were huge supporters of all of this stuff. And all I can say is that they just want to look good and progressive and pursue their DEI, diversity, equity, inclusion initiatives. So they just throw money at this stuff. Another interesting thing is in Alberta, actually, the program here has been funded by the Stollery family, which, lo and behold, they also fund a children's hospital, which has a gender clinic, a youth gender clinic. So they have this hospital that has a youth gender clinic, and they are also funding a program to teach children about gender identity, and confuse them. And I'm sure they've seen more patients over these last few years. I think that I hesitate to say that's, of course, the main reason they're doing this. I think there's a lot of, they want to look good, they want to look progressive, but that doesn't hurt. I'm sure that referrals have skyrocketed and they go straight to that clinic, they get their puberty blockers, they get their cross-sex hormones, and yeah, they benefit.
And that's where, as I say, predators know us better than we know them. You can have a sexual predator, but you can have a financial predator. And a predator has mastered the art of impression management. So they love being able to show their shock and dismay that we would ever even think that that would be their motive. Meanwhile, that is their motive. It is up to them to prove otherwise. The moment, let's say they were naive, okay, the moment you find out, if you're Mr. Corporate or Miss Corporate Canada or America, right? Financial responsibility would say, if you find out that your dollars are being used in one way or another to harm someone, then guess what you're going to do? You're going to act responsibly. I'm okay if to assume that even though these are really bright individuals who have a lot of bright marketing people, they do their due diligence, but I'm willing to say, oh, okay, they didn't know that their logo had a satanic pentagram on it. Oops. Okay. But the question is, once they find out, what do? Do they remove it, or do they double down saying, you guys have the issue, our pentagram stays? Our pedophile symbol, there are symbols that pedophiles use, right?
Yes.
So if you point out that, oh, that looks like one of these same pedophile symbols that the FBI put out on their documents that you can look up on Wikipedia, look up FBI symbols disclosed on Wikipedia, and there will be the symbols. And isn't that the darndest thing? We've got these organizations with pedophile symbols, yet they're not apologetic. They say, nope, you guys have the issues, our symbols remain, and you're reading into it, and it's just coincidence.
It's a reversal. I mean, it's just the good is bad, the bad is good and the ugly is beautiful, and it's just a huge reversal, everything that's happening, especially here in Canada. And I think, for example, the pinnacle of this ridiculousness is that teacher in Ontario with the prosthetic breasts. Like, that's not part of Soji 123, but like they have their own things teaching kids gender in school, and like that's just sort of the height of what's going on. Like, that man is a predator. And the school is allowing him to come to school like this, dressed up in fetish gear. That is already a predatory act. When I was, on Twitter, when this first started kicking up back in September, I was saying he's a sexual predator. And actually, I had a sort of unfortunate number of men kind of ask me, how do you know? And I'm like, because they think I'm insinuating that he has already harmed someone, already touched someone, which maybe he has, but they think that's what I'm saying. No, I mean, look at him. What he is doing right now is a predatory act.
Right.
He has sexualized himself. He's going to the classroom. I feel bad for the young girls who have to see him, the girls who are developing, who now feel very self-conscious because it's like this man is mocking them. But I feel bad for the young boys who have to see this, because that's, they're young boys. Like, they might have a weird reaction to seeing that, and how strange that is. This is like your shop teacher, right? I think you just can't view it as any other way, as that he is using children as part of his fetish. And here in Canada and in other places, we say that that's his human right to do that. And that boggles my mind. I can't believe that we've got to this point. But
And we've had, even Brad has, this issue came up, and I'm willing to consider, and Brad actually said, it may be that he's not a predator, he's just trying to prove a point, and he's going to see this through. But as I commented to Brad, so either way, there's better ways to prove a point. That
yes, and
what's happening is if you choose that method, and so let's say in the extreme, but I still don't believe it, but there's better ways to,
yes,
rather than
100%.
put body parts in front of the face with extended nipples of these boys. And on top of everything, it was in shop class where kids could lose a finger.
yeah. Personally, I think he's just deranged. But look, regardless of whether it's a joke or not, the issue
I
is
don't find it to be a joke. I don't think
no,
there's anything
no.
funny about it.
No,
Mocking
not
the
at
school
all.
board.
Whatever his purpose is, it's deranged either way. I mean, you don't do
Correct.
this if you're a normal man. But then, of course, just the bigger issue is just the school allowing it, the school board allowing it, everybody being too cowardly to do anything. Because, like the school board said, he can do this because he has a right to gender identity and expression. First of all, it's a very dumb reading of those protections, but okay, fine. Well, then be brave, fire him, let him take you to the Human Rights Tribunal and see how it plays out. If you care about the kids at all, right? That's just my thinking. I understand what the repercussions would be, but either you care about them or not, right? And at least then you could take this and see where it goes and it could play out and you could show just how insane things have gotten, but nobody is willing to, stick their neck out. And I understand not everybody can, but more people have to start speaking out. And I have some hope. Like, I think more people are. I love what you're doing. Thank you so much. It's the more that we all speak to each other and connect and put out content like this, the better chance that we will win this thing, no matter how long it takes.
That's exactly why we're
Because
here.
once you realize what's going on and how atrocious it is, you don't go back. You don't flip back to the other side. I've seen that a few times, weird situations, but most people don't go back.
That's right. And people need to understand the nature of deviance, especially in the male mind that is fueled by pornography, is that it doesn't go back. My work with sex offenders, right? The last thing they want to acknowledge is their porn use. And rare is the case that a guy will willingly, voluntarily back himself up away from that. So it gets worse and worse. And it drives him to become a predator in one way or another. And my concern, our concern, I'm going to assume you echo this, is that what this entire movement is doing is it is dumbing down the ability of reasonable adults to think in ways that are protective. So as mandated reporters, every teacher is, every school board member, they're trained in being able to, they have to know the warning signs of predation as far as potential sexual abuse. And what this entire movement, the Soji, the trans movement has done is it has caused what should be otherwise protective adults who are mandated reporters as well to reframe the 9 key red flag indicators of sexual perpetration, has caused us to reframe that in terms of gender confusion. And so now, even though it's right in front of our face, both a kid that's being perped on and a predator, we're now flipping the script and we're now misinterpreting it. So we can't protect a child that is being preyed upon or at risk. And we can't see a predator now that he's right in front of our face because we say, I know what it looks like, but it's really not that. That's all a predator needs to be able to continue accessing women and children, vulnerable women and children.
Yeah, that's a great way to put it. The way that it's clouding everybody's perceptions. I mean, that's kind of how you know that this is pushed ultimately by predators and for predators. Because what are its goals? Its goals are to confuse everyone, to confuse kids, to confuse people who would look out for them, to overlook signs and red flags. Some man invokes, I'm a woman, and suddenly he's allowed everywhere. I wrote a story for Redux about a woman who had encountered a man in the female change room of the swimming pool in Nanaimo. He came in, he looked under the stall where her daughter was changing. She could see that he was looking, and she was in there because she had heard rumors of this happening. So usually her daughter, she would go on her own. She feels like a grown up, she waits outside. But she was like, no, I'm going with you. So she saw this man doing that. She approached him and he said, I can be in here. I identify as a female. Like how brazen and bold it makes them, but for good reason, because then when she marched him out of the change room, she told the staff what had happened, and the staff warned her that, hey, you are violating his human rights and you could get arrested. She of course called the police after that. They opened a file. I'm not sure what's going on now, but how he was right. He was right to tell her, I can be in here, I'm a female. Because then she was chastised for taking him out, and he was spying on her daughter.
There it was.
So yeah, I wrote this story up for Redux, and I was just horrified, but not surprised is the sad thing. Not surprised. It's just such cover for these guys.
This is a huge public safety issue. That's what's really come about. This is a crisis of public safety now.
It is, yeah.
Eva, thank you as always. We'll have you back. You are a wealth of knowledge, as I say so often.
Thank you.
You truly are. It's been a privilege having you. Brad, thank you as always, and we will look forward to having Eva back.
Thank you very much to both of you, Eva and Jon. Always a pleasure having you both on the program. I'm Brad Wilder. This is Unmasking the Trans Movement with Jon Uhler. Please don't forget to like, share, and subscribe through our BitChute channel. We always try to get back to your comments as quickly as possible as well. You can also find us online at unmaskingthetransmovement.com. Till next time, I'll see you soon.